Hi everyone, it's Marie and I'm here with Cheryl from NonStopParis. We're going to be talking today about the differences between travel styles. So, as you know, I travel on a more full-time basis and I kind of jump from country to country a lot, whereas Cheryl does things slightly different. So do you want to talk about kind of what you do and how you do?
Sure. So I am a English person, obviously, you can probably tell from my accent. But yeah, so I live abroad and I live in Paris. So I guess you'd call me like an immigrant or expat or, you know, whatever word you want to choose. And it's the best of both worlds as far as I'm concerned. And I love it because I don't really have a huge tie to the UK, and I've always kind of dreamt about living the digital nomad lifestyle, but in practice I feel like this way of life is best suited to me. And yeah, I share it all on my YouTube channel, so it's all...
Yeah, definitely go check out her channel. It's linked down below, and also the video that we did on her channel too. Definitely go check that out. But also, would you like to talk more about your work, because you do have quite a flexible job that allows you to travel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if I'd say it allows me to travel like in the same way your job lets you travel, but I work remotely, so I am able to live in Paris. I don't need to find a job in Paris, which from experience I've found really difficult to do, because when I was there in 2015 it took me 3 months to find a job. But I'm able to work for a English company, so in my own language, and work remotely just with my laptops, but at the same time I am tied to like rough office hours, and I'm supposed to communicate with my colleagues, and I have quite a traditional setup really in terms of like the actual work that I do, but it's all just through a laptop, so I just don't need to go to an office, which allows me to, you know, like sometimes if I want to, for example, I went to visit my boyfriend's family one day, and we went down on the Thursday night, and we spent like the Friday day I was just working in his mum's house, and then we spent the evening together and things like that. So I can be a little bit flexible about where I am, because essentially as long as I've got my laptop and an internet connection I can work. But at the same time it is quite nice to stay in Paris and like maybe work from coffee shops and things like that, but in general I generally just stay in Paris. I don't do a lot of the travelling and working because it's just too much going on for me to do all the time. So but it is good to have that option, definitely.
What would you say are the main benefits from living in another country? What do you love about living abroad versus just seeing a country for a few days?
Living abroad is amazing because it opens up your mind so much. I mean, I do have a video about this on my channel, but one big example is when I spent Christmas in France. It kind of blew my mind that they really have such a different way of doing things than we do, and they're only like an hour's flight away or less. So like they don't have Christmas dinner like in the way that we know it. They don't open their Christmas presents on Christmas morning, like they do it all on Christmas Eve in the evening, and there's a lot of foie gras and champagne involved. So it's very, very different, and I kind of liked it, but at the same time, like Christmas, you know, this year I'm going to be doing Christmas properly. I see it as a way of really immersing yourself in a culture, and for me that's just been the most amazing experience, and I think it's not something that you're able to do when you go, for example, somewhere for a long weekend or even a week. Like I went to Rome recently and I spent 3 days there, and I got to see a lot. Like I saw a lot of the architecture and like the main sites, but you obviously don't do like your weekly shop, or you know, you don't make friends or make a community, and you don't make like a base of yourself, whether it's like a really deep rooted like long-term year living somewhere, or even more like you guys do when you're somewhere for 3 weeks or a month, and you know you have a lot more of a base and you might make a lot more connections than someone who's just there for days.
I think it's good that you do get to, like you said, experience all the different seasons, like the winter time, the Christmas, the summer, Halloween, all that kind of stuff. And although me and Andy do travel quite slowly, so sometimes we stayed in Budapest for 7 weeks, and we found that even in just 7 weeks we already found community. We'd made friends in the local area, we found the local coffee shop we like to go to each Saturday. We kind of already got that vibe of community, and we knew what supermarket we'd go to each every so many days, and so we kind of got that middle way point. Like we got that kind of feeling like a local, but not really, because we still knew we were going soon, and it's that mindset of not really connecting too much because you know you're going to go. So I think that is kind of, it is really a middle way point between travelling fast and just seeing somewhere every so many days, and travelling living abroad and really merging into it. I think what me and Andy do is a real middle way, and there's good and bad points to that, and it's yeah, I think I would love to experience living abroad like you do, because I would love to really just stay somewhere for all 4 seasons and see what it's like all the way through the year, not just in the holiday season or in the winter season. So yeah, I think there's definitely pros and cons to both.
Definitely.
Yeah. And what we do is definitely kind of middle way, so
I mean,
it's interesting.
It's really challenging, for example, like finding somewhere to live abroad and paying taxes abroad and all of those things that are difficult even at home in England, but when you have to do it in another language and all the like bureaucracy that goes with it.
That is definitely one of the things that put us off living abroad temporarily, because we'd realised that we'd have to like do all these things to get accepted to actually live in the Netherlands. Even though we are European citizens, there's still things you have to go through in terms of taxes and registering and getting your birth certificate like authenticated or something. There's quite a few things you have to go through, and we thought, let's just travel for a bit and then deal with that later. So it definitely is a bit of work living, but I think it's definitely worth it as well.
Yeah.
How do you find living in a country where the language is always foreign, doing your everyday life in kind of a foreign language?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult at times. I mean, when I first arrived in Paris this time around, so I lived there for 3 months in 2015, I was an au pair, and my French level was low, basically. Like, I could kind of understand small things, and I mean, when I'm thinking about it now, that does go to show that I have improved a lot in the 10 months I've been there, but I'm still definitely not at a point where I could, for example, work in French. But, you know, going to the supermarket, like opening a bank account, like all these kind of things, like I've been able to do in another language. It's something that I would definitely feel better about if I was at the level where I could work in French, because I would have so much more like options of people to meet. Because I think you meet a lot of people who are your colleagues and like their friends, and I don't have that many French speaking friends, which is a shame. I think really like to feel more immersed in the actual culture with like friends, because a lot of my French friends are actually my boyfriend's friends, and the people who I interact with are usually through him, so they're not really mine, if that makes sense. So that would be something that I hope will happen eventually.
You're picking it up subconsciously. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I think you're actually quite good at speaking it on a basic level, and you just don't realise you are, because you've been here so long.
Maybe that's true. Like when we went yesterday to buy the tickets at the station, I didn't even think to put it in English, because I was just like, what does it say? I just read it all in French, so yeah, it's good.
And in terms of faster travel with languages, sometimes you're there for a long time, like 8 weeks, and it would be really beneficial to know the language, especially in my case, because I have so many intolerances and stuff and allergies, so I always need to like ask in detail about what ingredients is in food. So I'm always having to learn like what milk means, what gluten means, what bread means, like all the different basic words. So I could tell you what milk means in like 7 different languages now, and like I'm picking up little things, but the problem is you don't have time to dedicate yourself to a language. Sometimes I kind of wish I was living in another country so that I could just immerse myself in one language and not have to worry about others. Right now I'm kind of just jumping from country to country every so many weeks, so I kind of give up learning languages. Like, I'd like to commit myself to a language, but then I'm like, well, what if I'll never use it? So I think that the huge benefit of living abroad is definitely that you get to know what language you want to commit yourself to. Because, you know, when your native language isn't English, you know that English is the next language you should probably learn. But when you're English, you don't really know what to learn. So it depends on where you're going to live or where you're going to travel to a lot. So I think that when we get a base like you, we'd love to kind of learn another language. So right now, I'm just mixing it around, and I do get mixed up all the time in my head. So I'll come from Spain to France, and then I'll start speaking Spanish to people. Hard to kind of switch. So I think it'd be good to just have one language to focus on. So I think that's a really good pro to living abroad. How has your diet changed, or your preference in foods changed since you've been in France? And are there any foods you really miss from England?
Sure. I mean, I've kind of been going through a bit of a change in my diet anyway, because I've been exploring like veganism and stuff like that, so I think a lot of the change in my diet is because of that. And I'm not a vegan now, but I definitely eat minimal cheese, and I almost never eat meat, which as someone who's living in France might sound a bit strange, and it can be definitely challenging, because, you know, meat and cheese is such a huge part of the food here. But, you know, I'm not that into it anyway, so I get by. But I think there's a huge difference, because a lot of the things that you would just not even think about and throw in your shopping trolley at home, like, they just don't have here. So you have to either find alternatives or make it yourself. Like, I make my own tahini, because getting hold of tahini in France is really difficult. Like you can get it, but you have to go to like specialist shops or stuff like that. But also going to restaurants is another thing, because in England we don't really have English food. Like we do obviously, but it's not really a celebrated thing. Like you don't have chain restaurants other than like Wetherspoons where you have like British food and stuff. Like a lot of it is very international. Like I'd say the most popular foods in England are like Nando's, which is what Portuguese, Wagamama, which is like Japanese fusion, and all of these things. Like they're just a couple of examples, but here there's a lot of French food in restaurants. I mean, obviously you can get international food, but perhaps you have to know the exact part of town to go to. In terms of eating French food, it's something that you have to kind of embrace, because if you want to eat in central Paris, you have to either eat sushi or French food, and I do like both, luckily. But yeah, I've tried a lot of food that I'd never tried before. Like I haven't eaten frog's legs or snails or anything like that, but you know, like beef bourguignon and all of these kind of things that I never would have had before. So yeah, it's opened up my taste bud experience a little. But for example, this morning I didn't have breakfast, and I've kind of like trained myself out of having breakfast, because breakfast isn't super popular here in France.
And I was kind of thinking, I hadn't really thought of this, but British people really do like breakfast.
They
like,
love breakfast.
You don't think about when you live there, but everyone's like, oh, it's the most important meal of the day, and they have things like porridge or like big breakfast, or even just something small. But British people, like, they always like to have their breakfast. So yeah, it's really, I can't go without breakfast. So
and then something funny has just come to mind, which is when my mum was visiting a couple of months ago in a coffee shop, and I ordered a like a coffee, like a cappuccino or whatever, and my mum ordered a normal coffee. It's like, what do you think you're gonna get from ordering a normal coffee? A normal coffee back in the UK would be like a long black with cold milk, right?
Yeah.
And like an Americano with milk. But she got an espresso, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because that is a more normal coffee to a lot of people. Most places in mainland Europe, if you order a normal coffee, you're going to get an espresso, whereas in the UK we almost never drink espresso. So I guess it's like a little culture shock, like a little funny culture shock, where you're like, people have such different experiences.
Andy's kind of noticed the same with tea. So Andy's a big tea drinker, you know, typical British person. He likes his tea with his sugar and his milk. And you know, you go to other countries and they'll say, oh, like a normal tea, and they'll be like, they don't know what that is. Most countries don't put milk in their tea. I don't think. Like in England, you just have all the milk you can get and all the sugar usually. But like, yeah, in other countries, especially in the rest of Europe, I find they just have black tea. So now he's learned to say with milk, and yeah, he's just learned little things that you wouldn't have to say in England, because in England it's just automatically assumed that you would probably want milk. But also we've found with food, people say to us like all the time, oh, you must, you know, have tried so many different kinds of cultural food. Truthfully, I would say my diet hasn't changed since I've been travelling at all. Like, there's certain things that I pick up from countries, not necessarily based on that country, but just things in that country that I found I've eaten a lot more of. Like when I was in Budapest, I had a lot of like really nice kind of waters with like fruits in and stuff, and I've started making them myself now. And when I was in Amsterdam, I got a lot of like pancakes or crepes, and they did lots of really cool gluten and dairy free ones there, so I ate a load of them. And I've kind of taken from that eating crepes with like savoury things in. That was never a thing I'd do before I went to Amsterdam. But in terms of really eating cultural foods, that's not something I experienced, because like I said, I have a lot of food allergies and intolerances. So for me, most of the time when we travel, we eat at home. So I buy myself the regular food I would in the supermarket at home. So I don't really go out to a restaurant and experience the cultural foods, because usually I can't even eat them. So Andy does get to experience it a bit more, but for me, travelling hasn't changed my diet at all. And it's kind of sad, because I wish I could kind of try the cultural foods, but at the same time, it's just something I'm used to. So for me, my diet hasn't changed and really at all. But
it would do if you didn't have all these intolerances. Like you'd try all the patisserie and
I'd love
different
to.
things.
Yeah.
Go to Italy and have a huge pizza. But yeah, it must be difficult when you have intolerances.
I try not to focus on it, so now I just don't really think about it, and it doesn't bother me. But I think people who are used to eating lots of cool foods, it would bother them.
Yeah, especially because a lot of people travel because they're huge foodies and they want to try different like cuisines. But there's so many other amazing things about traveling, so you get to experience those.
Definitely, food just isn't a big part of my life. I wish it was, but it isn't. So for me, I focus on things like seeing the sights and meeting the people and emerging in the culture that's just not food. I think maybe when I start going to other countries like maybe Southeast Asia or India, then maybe I will find a difference, and maybe I'll struggle even more, because we're very lucky in Europe. You know, most supermarkets have a gluten-free aisle and they sell pretty much the same stuff you'd buy in England. But maybe when I go to more kind of bigger culture shock countries, then I will really find a difference, and maybe my diet will change slightly, and I'll have to adapt, but at the same time I don't know how much I can adapt because there's only so much I can eat. So yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to see how that goes when I go to different countries, but for now it's not really changed. What do you think are the pros and cons to travelling on a short-term basis? So like, say a weekend in Rome, what are the pros to that and what are the cons to that?
Sure, I mean, obviously there's a lot that you can jam into a couple of days. Like, you can be surprised sometimes of how much you manage to see, but I feel like you only ever see the place from a surface level, like the tourist view, which is fine and it's amazing. Like, no one's going to dismiss that and say that it's not an amazing experience, but I think you're never going to really know a place until you've been there a good couple of months, I think.
Yeah.
You know, done your weekly shop there, like you've had to go to the doctors and the tax office and all of these things, because that's the only way that you really see a local's eye view. But I don't know, it is surprising sometimes how much you can see in a couple of days, but you know, especially if you're like me, you wake up early in the morning, you have like all 3 meals of the day in the local culture or the local cuisine, and you have a bit of an itinerary where you go bam 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 throughout the day. And I think with you, when you're travelling across a month or a couple of months, because you have to spend time at home working and looking after animals and things like that, like you might perhaps see the same amount of things but spread out over a lot of time.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's interesting to see, like I haven't really experienced anywhere other than Paris in like a really in-depth level, whereas you've been quite a few places now where you've seen a lot.
Yeah, for example, when we were in Budapest, we were there for 7 weeks, so we went to a thermal bath once. That's something people normally jam into a weekend, and we went to, say, 2 museums, and we did like a couple of day trips. So we did what most people would probably jam into 3 or 4 days. We did it in 7 weeks, so we really spread it. Like, some days we would literally wake up, work, go for a walk, come home. We didn't sightsee every day, so it is a really different experience. And for me, I like short city breaks in a lot of ways because it feels more like a holiday. So if we were, say, going to, I don't know, Paris for 3 days, I wouldn't work because we're only there 3 days. I would literally just kind of spend them 3 days sightseeing. So I would see it from a tourist perspective. I'd go see everything, I'd do everything, I'd turn MARLOKC in 3 days. So it would feel like a holiday. Whereas when I'm travelling for like 4 weeks, it doesn't feel like a holiday, it feels more like a limbo between life and travel. It's interesting.
Because for me, I don't feel like being in Paris is like travelling. It's more like when you move to a new place, like anywhere, like most people watching this will have at least moved to a new city or experienced that kind of thing before. And yes, Paris is amazing and very beautiful, and like for the first, I'd say 4 months, it was very transitional, whereas now it's just I live here. I know the kind of coffee shops and things that I want to do, but there are still so many things that I haven't experienced. But you have that anywhere. Like when I lived in London for 5 years, there were loads of things I didn't do. Like I never went to the London Dungeon, I never went inside the Tower of London, like loads of things I didn't do.
I think also the interesting thing about being somewhere long term is you don't feel that rush either. So like you don't feel rushed to try and see everything at once. You kind of allow yourself to spread it out and relax. I mean, like I didn't live far from London, and I've worked in London loads, and I've still not done half the things that tourists do in London. Like it's weird because I was so close to London, I could have seen it all, and I've never been on the London Eye or done the London Dungeon or any of that. So
I think you do get complacent as well when you know that you're somewhere for the long haul, because when I'm in Paris, I'm kind of like, you know, I spend a lot of time with my cat and I work and I see my friends, and I'm never kind of, unless people come visiting for the weekend or something, I'm never like, oh, let's go and do this super touristy thing or this super touristy thing, when I really could just spend loads more of my time exploring in that way. But I'm kind of in local mode now, so you know, I've been there almost a year. So,
and also I think it's good to mention financially, it's kind of cheaper to live somewhere and experience living there rather than travelling quickly, or also it's more financially easier to stay somewhere for like a month or 2 months than just do a city break, because I find that when we do like a 3-day trip, it would sometimes cost us the same amount as it would cost us to stay somewhere for 1 month just in 3 days.
Well, yeah, so you think about when you go on holiday, if you're eating out 3 meals a day, you're going to all these excursions, paying to get in for tickets for places, you probably use the metro way more than you would normally. So all of that really adds up, and it's definitely true that, you know, I now would probably do like 1 thing a week or go to 1 coffee shop a week, or whereas if you're on holiday, you want to experience as much as you can within that short amount of time. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think that's it then. Yeah, should we end it?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much everything we wanted to talk about. Definitely head over to Cheryl's channel to watch all of her videos about living in Paris and culture shocks and just working remotely and all that kind of stuff we tend to talk about. And we did a video on her channel too, so definitely go check that out. So yeah, I'm going to end this video here, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up and give me a like if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, see you next time. Bye!